So I've had the A7C for quite a while now. It's been in my kit for at least a month or so, and I've done a lot of YouTube videos with it. If you guys look back, probably 10 or 15 of my last YouTube videos would have been completely with this camera. I've done a lot of photography with it, and I've used it in my wedding kit quite a lot also. So today we're going to get into my full review of the A7C. Stick around, I'm going to show you guys a lot of images I've taken with it and a lot of video, and I'm filming this review with the A7C also in 4K, 25p, 100 megabit a second with iFocus, and I can see it's tracking me really well. All the photos you're going to see are edited with my preset pack. The link is in the description, and I'm going to put the settings I used for each photo in the corner also. As always, I will put some raw files in there so you guys can play with them for yourself. We're going to talk about photo, we're going to talk about video, we're going to talk about low light, autofocus, everything. So let's jump straight into it. So first I want to talk about the build and the quality of it and compare it to the A7 Mark III, which is what a lot of people are going to be comparing this camera to and deciding between. So it's obviously basically an A7 Mark III in a smaller body with a flip out screen, and it's geared a little bit more towards video. Saying that though, it has some photo features that are better than the A7 Mark III also. The body itself is not too comfortable in my hands, but I do have quite large hands, and you can get a grip for it, which I've ordered from Amazon. I'll update you guys how that feels. It's just like a finger grip, but it looks really nice, and I'm hoping it improves the feel of the camera quite a lot. So overall, I definitely prefer how the A7 Mark III feels in the hand when using it as a photography camera as opposed to a video camera. But this camera is mostly, for me, it's mostly for a video purpose. The actual physical build quality of the camera feels pretty decent. The buttons on the back of it are a little bit nicer than the A7 Mark III. It has the exposure compensation dial, which I use a lot. It's obviously lacking a few custom buttons, which does kind of annoy me a little bit. I'm still getting to know what I can program, and I'm adjusting my settings as I go. Once I've really fine-tuned it and got my settings all dialed in and my custom functions, I'm going to make a setup video probably next week, maybe the week after, for the A7C specifically, so you guys can go ahead and set it up just like I do, or maybe just get a few tips. The other difference on the body itself is the record button on top, which obviously hints from Sony to its users that, you know, it is geared towards video use. And it also has the flip out screen, which is great for YouTube content creators and just video in general. So I'm not a fan of the tilt screen like on the A7C when it comes to photography. I definitely prefer the tilt out screen, but that is kind of personal preference. But obviously the flip out screen is going to be much better for video creators, namely YouTube creators. So that leads on to the rear screen and the viewfinder. Now these are probably my least favorite parts of the camera. The rear LCD screen isn't very good. It seems like it's the same one as the A7 III, so if your photo looks overexposed on the rear screen, it may not actually be overexposed because it doesn't have the dynamic range on the actual monitor to be able to tell you that, and the colors aren't exactly accurate. It definitely has like a pinkish hue compared to the viewfinder, which is color accurate, but you know, it's not very large. You know, it does the job, and we all knew that was going to be an issue with the A7C. But you know, I have to be honest, and yeah, I'm not really a fan of the rear screen. I feel like for the money, you know, they could have definitely done better on at least the LCD screen. I mean, come on, my D700 Nikon from, I don't know how long that came out, 10, 12 years ago, that has a better LCD screen than this one. So yeah, not a fan of the LCD screen. So talking about battery life before we get into everything else, the battery life I actually find is pretty good. It's at least as good as the A7 Mark III that I had, and you know, same with my A9s and all that kind of stuff. The battery life is fine, and I do really like that it takes the same batteries as my A9s, so I don't have to buy different ones, and I can use the same charger and all that kind of stuff. So really happy with the battery life. Alright, now before we get into the video features, let's talk about photo and how I think it performs in terms of a photography camera. So one of the biggest benefits with the A7C over the A7 Mark III is this has Sony's real-time tracking, which is just fantastic. The focus is definitely definitely better than the A7 III. Not quite as good as my A9s, but it is quite up there. It performs really well, and it definitely performs better in low light in terms of autofocus over the A7 Mark III. So that's going to be a benefit if you're using maybe the A7 Mark III and you want to get an A7C as your second camera or backup camera. It's going to be a really good performer in terms of low light autofocus, especially when it comes to wedding receptions, which is obviously what I would be using it for if I wasn't using my A9s. The image quality itself is really great. It's obviously pretty much the same sensor as the A7 Mark III, if not the exact same sensor as the A7 III. So it's really good in low light, and you know, it's plenty sharp enough. Good dynamic range, good colors, nice skin tone. I know a lot of people ask me about that. I don't have an issue with skin tone over the board with any Sony cameras at this stage, so it's just not a problem for me. But you know, I am using my presets and I've got them fine-tuned for that purpose. So if I was going to sum up the A7C as a photo camera, I would say it's really fantastic, bar the viewfinder and the LCD screen somewhat. Otherwise it's really great, really amazing autofocus, really good image quality, and yeah, it's just overall a really good camera and a really small body. Obviously the only other downside with the build itself is that it only has one memory card slot. It's not going to be an issue for most people, but if you're a wedding photographer like I am, it's definitely a concern. But if I'm being totally honest, I haven't had any cards fail since I've been on the SanDisk Extreme Pro cards. I have had a few Lexar cards fail in the past, but that's a big debate that's been going on for ages. I know a lot of people have had SanDisk cards fail and never had a Lexar. It's just down to whatever your luck is, I guess. But as a wedding photographer, I would definitely be nervous using the A7C as my main camera, because it's like, what if a memory card fails? It's just a what if situation. But like I said, that's pretty much down to your personal preference. I would just be thinking about this kind of photography you're doing. If it's family shoots, you know, and one card fails, which is going to be very unlikely, that is something you can usually redo. You know, if it's a personal use camera, it's probably not going to be an issue for most people. So just weigh that up and see how you feel about it yourself. So let's talk about video, which is the main reason I bought the A7C. Obviously, as a YouTube creator, this is a fantastic piece of kit for me, and I've really, really been loving it. So the other purpose that I got the A7C for was to film wedding ceremonies. Before the A7C, I had an A7 Mark III in a cage with an Atomos Ninja V and a big V-mount battery. I had everything going to an SSD to overcome that record time limit. And you know, it was working really, really well, but it's a big unit. I had to have a separate kind of shoulder camera bag for it with the charger and everything. And the A7C, you know, it doesn't have any record limit. It doesn't overheat, which I'm really glad to see. Well, for me at least, I've recorded 4K ceremonies in midday sun for over an hour and not had any overheating warnings or anything like that. So it's a really fantastic option for me. The battery's plenty good enough to record an entire ceremony, even a really long, like Catholic one or something like that. I can just set it up, let it record, and you know, I'm good to go. It makes it much easier. It's a much smaller kit, and I can use it as a photo camera if I need to. So yeah, that kind of replaced that whole setup. So now I'm selling my Ninja V. Obviously there's other benefits to the Ninja V, like recording 422 and 10-bit, and you know, you can record RAW if you're using it with the A7S Mark III or something like that. But it's just not something I'm going to do, and it's not something I need. And I would rather have a smaller camera, especially when I'm doing weddings like over on Waiheke Island, or if I have to fly to a wedding. It's much easier to carry the A7C with me. So obviously I could go out and buy an A7S Mark III and have even better low light and just better functionality overall as a video camera. But you know, it's double the price at least, and I mean, where I am in New Zealand anyway. And it's just not really necessary for me at this point in time. So yeah, the video features are fantastic. Great low light, really good autofocus for video. I can chuck it on my gimbal. I have the Ronin RS-C2, and it just works flawlessly with autofocus. I can really trust it to do what I need it to do. It obviously has the Sony color profiles like S-Log and all that, which I am using. So I usually use S-Log 2 with Pro Color and no other adjustments at all, but sometimes I'll use S-Log 3, and it works really, really well. I also really like how the microphone jack doesn't obstruct the screen and I can still flip it around, so that's a really well thought out thing. I mean, to be fair, if they didn't do that, we'd be pretty pissed off. So thank you, Sony, for doing that. Now, I think the biggest question everybody's going to have that I can see in terms of like forums and online and all the questions I've seen on other YouTube creators' channels is, should I buy the A7C or the A7 Mark III? They're pretty much the same price, depending on where you are in the world. Now, in my personal opinion, if I was only doing photo and I didn't really need the real-time tracking, I'd probably buy the A7 Mark III just because of the handling and the better viewfinder. It makes it a little bit better of a photo camera for me. But if you are doing hybrid shooting or you're leaning more on the side of video use, I would definitely buy the A7C, but that's pretty self-explanatory. The only thing I would say is just think about how much you use a viewfinder and think about how it's going to feel to hold in the hand, because that's going to be probably the two biggest things. But that's just my personal opinion. You guys let me know in the comments which one you went ahead and purchased or which one you're planning on purchasing. Subscribe to my channel, give this video a thumbs up if you enjoyed it, and I'll see you guys in the next video in a couple of days.